we're going to be finishing up the videos of strategies, right? So today what we're going to look at is something a little bit different. These are strategies for those who, let's say, $3,000 trades, $6,000, $10,000, and are going to only have the capabilities with job work and all that to really find trades that they can hold and kind of run through over the, like a trade, like 2 trades a week that, take 3, 4, 5, even up to 7 or 14 days, right? These are long swing trades type trades. So these are trades that you're holding. So instead of like day trading, this is more of setting yourself up. So how do we get to those type trades, right? So first thing we want to do is take a look here at the setups, right? So like all strategies, they are all types of boxes, strategies that have gone in here, etc. But here's how we, use our system here. And I'm gonna slide down here, and this is basically when you're going along, what you're buying, what you're selling, right? So we like to see on this type of scenario, we want to run a weekly, right? Because we want to test down and we want to just roll with the greatest possibilities of, the opportunities to make these trades possible, right? So this is where you want to be in the time frames where they're giving you the longest opportunity. So normally we're going to start with a weekly time frame, right? Now, as you can see here on XRP, weekly time frames, when they get in these bottom areas, right? These are your relative strength indexes, and you normally want to trade with these on the coming up off the weekly, right? Because this is just simply the momentum with the people, right? So here we can see the top over here has been toppled out, and this is bringing it down, and that's where you want to sell in these areas here depending on the value, market, etc. But this is just a general, like, if you're getting into trades and building, right? So after a big pullback like this, we like to see 2 moves, right? Remember, we always talk about that, where we like to see a move where there's a push up, right? And I'll make this white here. There's a pullback, wave 1, wave 2, and then this is the wave that you want to start building your momentum on. Now, theoretically, I like to see another wave go through. I like to see another pullback, and then I like to get in a little more heavier on the 3rd wave of the second opportunity here. So it's kind of like always working in 3s, right? So this is the one here that I'm building into, right? Because that's normally the one that's going to have a little more go. The first one is confirmation that a trade is developing. The second one is confirmation that, volume, remember, volume is king. This is where volume is gaining momentum, right? So this is where you see these type of trades, type of plays happen, right? So right here, if we're looking at a trade section here, we can see that we had a pullback, right? I'm not going to count October's crazy crash because that was actually manipulated. And that was a well-planned API attack. So that doesn't really count. So we'll keep that here. But here's how this goes here. There's a pullback, right? Then there's a bounce, right? We can see here there's a bounce on the weekly. It made its bounce. And that kind of gives us a target here, right? So the target that we're going to be looking for is going back into this section here. And the target that we're going to, look to try to get back to is this top here, somewhere at about 241 overall, right? So then there's the next big pullback, the second move down, right? So you can see here there's the the big move down. There's a bounce, and then there's the 3rd wave, which is the biggest pull down, which we have right there. So this allows us to just get into a situation where now, once that happens, we're a little more secure that once this bottom piece here kind of, bounces here and starts to show a movement to the top, that's the beginning or the area that we can look for support, where we can expect some type of, pullback return, and then eventually, a growing from here. So to keep it simple, these type of trades, you'd be using some leverage, like 3 to 5. I mean, I'm a big fan of 5%. This is where strategy is going to be very important. But this is where your, once you have your strategy, this is more of a system that's going to be more important. And system's going to come down to where it's percentages and how much you're investing at those times. So here we've got our move that we wanted. We had the weekly bounce up, we had the weekly pullback, and then the beginning of this next move here, right? So this is the first bounce, we've seen it. We're going to move this over here, and then this is the next move up, right? So this is going to get labeled here as the weekly second move up, right? So now we know that that's our weekly second move up candle, and this is where what we're looking for is the third move up, which would be another pullback, then another push up for the stronger support. But this gives us an area to look for support and resistance now that we're in that second phase, right? So now what we can do here is, if you zone out, like, the clusters, here you can see there's a kind of like the blocks, breaker blocks, stuff like that. So this is the beginning. This is what we mean, like all things kind of have the same thing. This is also considered a channel, right? So if we went down here and we discovered a channel, parallel channel, we would see that there's a parallel channel that kind of works across this section. There's the original resistance areas, and then this becomes the next section of support and resistance here. And then you can see that the other channel was down here, where it was this channel here until there was a breakout, right? So this is where you can see that now these are also, going to be the next support and resistance, right? And then what I mean by here is, if you take a look here, this is the channel. It bounces up, all right, gets a little bit higher, breaks through, comes back down, retest, and that's where it starts to build the channel where it rejects again. Then it comes back down, and then when you look for, there's a breakout, which happens here, and then the retest, which would be here, and that is where on this retest, that would be the area that people would have looked for an entry point, and then that's where they would have all this big move to the top side. Now after that big move happens, it starts over. Here's your big move. What happens? It starts to build a channel. It comes back down, touches a channel. This one is a little bit further down, but you can see that it closes out here. Then it moves to the top side of that channel. Then it comes back to that channel, and it's basically going sideways through this channel. And what you're looking for here is the candles breaking out, and that doesn't happen until it's further down. But you can see where, when you see this type of breakdown, this extra, that's a liquidity grab, right? So most of the time you're going to start buying on that next level when it pushes up. You're going to start setting your buys on that support zone. This happened to be a second liquidity grab where they went even further down on there. And then after that bounce, you see the rejection that happens here, and they pull back down for the support again. And that's where you start to see the momentum or the volume start to build, where there's lower lows. So on this pullback here, after these two liquidity grabs, that is where you would trigger and start thinking of getting this type of, that one being your entry for your super long, you know what I mean? So that is the section there. Now, in between all this, as you start to piece this together, you're going to see that, besides these, parallel channels, there happens to be the blocks right here. So you see the top of the block, the support, resistance, and then the breakout from the block, and then all of a sudden this long move. So now that is going to be where what most people would be looking for is for the retouching of that block at some point as the ultimate support, right? So you see, probably hear some people talking about 75 cents as the best support zone. And then from there, if it does get down to that level at some point, that's where most people are going to have their money, because they're going to be looking for this to return to that $3 section. So it's going to open up all that possibility for profits. But that's where, the ideal of this. So now, how do we know where to find this pullback? Is it going back to the block? Is it going to bounce off the 786? Now remember, the one thing about Fibonacci's, you got to put in there is that the Fibonacci line is always going to be, the 786 is going to be the hardest line to break through, whether it's support or resistance, right? Because that's where most people put their targets. So more than likely, when it gets down to this level here, which is 78.60, that 786, that's probably going to bounce from that area there, right? So that kind of gives us the idea of support and resistance. And then we can come along and we see on the Fibonacci side, we have these lines here as support. And then you have this 786 here as support. Now that we have those down, we can turn around and slide over. And the target zone, I'll go ahead and put this up here. Target zone is always going to be this red line here. And I'm just going to turn the target zone to blue. And that's our target. So now that we have those set up with our supports going back to the weekly, we can see all that. Now we can slide over to what we call the daily, right? And now we get a more micro look here to see what's happening, right? So we already know that we're right here. This is what's important about this arrow is this is the second bounce, second move up from the weekly, right? So now we have to compare this with what we have on the data on the daily. Now you see the daily is already at the top here, which means what we're looking for is a third pullback, which looks like we're probably going to end up getting here on the daily, a third pullback. And then after that, once the daily has its pullback, then that's where we would be looking for the volume to return, wherever that is, and then that would be our entry point for that, right? So right now you see down here, once you go negative here, you get a green moon, right? So this is kind of where strategy-wise, here's a blue moon. It goes negative below the 0 line. It turns green right here. So a lot of times what we want to play is the reset, meaning that once it goes green, right, we want to see a blue moon, and then we want to buy the next green moon, right? Which will give us the opportunity to be buying the volume that is increased over time. So that's the trade that we'd be looking for, that once it goes down below 0, you go green, blue, and then the next green is going to be the trade that we're going to be looking to get into on the daily, right? So that's how we're setting this up as far as how we're going to get into there. So this right here is what we're looking for here, is for that to become that blue moon. And then from there, we're going to expect it to turn green again. And then on that next green moon, that is our daily entry, right? So I'm going to go ahead and mark this here. So that is the daily moon reset, right? So green, blue, green entry, right? That's the reset one that we're looking for. So now that we have that set up, we can go ahead and put our arrows up here so that we can see the areas that we're kind of working around. And now that we know that we're looking for that, I'm just going to go ahead and name this real quick. And this is the daily moon reset long, right? Which just means that it goes from green to blue to green, right? So we want daily moon reset, green, blue, green entry, right? That's the trade that we're looking for. Now that we have that there, we know that we got a pullback on the daily. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move over to my 4-hour to give myself a little more ideal of where we're sitting as far as support, resistance. You can see here we have our earlier resistance from our weekly that we kind of wrote out. We have our support here from our weekly. You can see that this support has become resistance. It hit it perfectly. And now we have the daily down here. Now, if you take a parallel channel here and you take it in between these particular support and resistance, and you just drop it down here, that'll give you your middle area. Now you can see that you're in a pretty good area here where you can see the top is support, you see the bottom is resistance, and then you can see the middle part of your support and resistance. So resistance, resistance or support, and then you have your middle section here. Now a lot of times we'd want to see this pulling down to these sections and starting to build up and get momentum. If it starts to build earlier, that shows us that it's starting to move a little bit more. So now we have to wait on that daily moon reset to see where it's going to take us, because that's the entry that we're looking for, right? So now that we know that that entry is coming, we're looking for these, areas here where this line comes across. So if this starts to build up and then starts to lose momentum here, maybe hitting the 382 on there, and then working its way down to where it could find, resistance or support there, or it could find it on the next Fibonacci line here, right? So this is giving us our ideal of where we should be looking after that daily moon reset to get ourselves in. And remember, this is going to be a setup into the trade that we want. So now that we got that part done, now the next part is, because this is a swing trade, it's a longer holding trade, this is where you come down and you would be setting yourself up with basically the ideal here would be that you'd be looking for XRP to come down to 144.95, right? And if it goes down further than that, the lowest you'd be seeing is something around 133. When that happens and we start to get our next moon reset, right, in these areas here, the question is, now that we have our strategy for our long trade here, the question is going to come down to, what is our ideal for our system, right? So our system, because this is a little bit longer, I'll show you what it is. So our system for this is going to be set up a little differently. So on your isolated, make sure it's always isolated. You're going to go down here and you're going to rock the long more in a 10x situation. I'm a little better on my entry, so I would do a 15. And then that would be setting up your scenario where you would be looking for your long position at that time. So you'd be setting up your long at not a 15x, but you'd be looking more at like a 5 or a 10x based on where your target is, right? So let's go look at our target here. So our target, when this bounce happens, is basically playing back up to that higher level, which is probably going to be the 786 here on the 4 hour, right? So if we measure this out, we can see that if we're getting this bounce here, the earlier bounce, we're looking at about a 10% move, which just means that if we did a 10x and we have a 10% move, that is 100% gain, right? Remember, what we're looking for is to get into a trade that is going to offer us 30 to 50%. So whatever the trade is, we just want to be half of that as a ideal goal, which would be about 6%. That's about a 12% trade. So this trade fits perfectly with what we're looking for, and this allows us to estimate how much leverage we need to use. So in reality, since this trade has a 12x possibility, which means if we do a 5x, it could pull off 50 to 60%, that half of that is a 6% move. So even with a 5x on that, we are still getting our 30%. Because remember, we are doing $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 trades. So just kind of in your head, if you're doing a 30% trade on a $5,000 trade, you know, that's $1,500, right? The goal is to accomplish, you know, 2 of these trades a month, averaging $3,000 in the worst case scenario, because some of these are going to do better than 30%. Some of them are going to run for 50. Some of them are going to do 100%. You know, all depends on how the market conditions are. But the goal here is just to make sure that you're always locked in to where your worst case scenario is 30%. This is why running this is a good play. So when you're using something like $6,000 or something like that, that allows you to trade and get your entry set up where you're designing your entry plays based off of, you know, your strategy, or your strategy is set up. Now you need your system set up, right? So this system here would be very, very simple. It would be off the 4 hour, right? So what we'd be looking for here is the daily to, you know, move back down. Let's take a look at the 4 hour. You can see the 4 hour starting to bend here, right? So a lot of times, as always, we are always going to look for the confirmation of a move, right? So what's the confirmation of a move? Well, we're expecting the 4 hour to go up here, right? So what we would expect here is the 4 hour to bounce off the bottom, which it did, push up like it did, and then we want it to come back down, and on the next 4 hour move up, after building steam, momentum, and, you know, volume, then we're getting into that trade as a safer trade, right? The second movement is always a little bit better. Then you can play your strategy based on how you get in. You can do it where, let's say you have $6,000, right? When you decide on your entry, in your entry level, right, you can decide that you want to ensure that you have a really good entry, and you can do the halves, right? Meaning that whatever you're getting in, you would use 50% as an entry, and you would put the other 50% at a lower level, right? So this is where system comes into play, right? So we're going to do a full video on systems, but I just want to kind of show you here, right? So here's our 4 hour moving up. So we know that we're waiting for the next 4 hour down and up, right? So let's slide down here and let's get more into what we have as entry. So first, the entry is we don't want to trade when the 1 hour is headed down, right? So you can see right here the 1 hour is headed down. So we would be trading when the 1 hour finishes its down movement, right, and starts to move up. So if we take a look here at the 45 minute, we can see that we have support and resistance over here. And we have lines here. We have support and resistance lines, channels. This is just a channel that's moving up. You can see the channel right here. All right, there's your channel moving up. There you go. And this is where this is going to play its role. See how it bounced, broke it, bounce, but it's starting to gain momentum here. It's starting to kind of push up here, but this is where, you know, we can see it in the future as it starts to move down. We could expect this to come back down to this area here, 148, and then, you know, continue its movement to the upside. And then what we're looking for here as a target is this white line that we have here, which was previous support, which is going to be resistance. So if we plan out a trade that we say, okay, we're going to set our entry points off of these support areas here, we're still looking at about a 9.5%, 10% trade. So that's still, half of that is 5, right? Meaning that if we did a 5x leverage at a 5% move, it's still 25%, possible more, right? So we're still in a good condition here. So all this right here, I'm just going to put a line right here. This is going to represent our 10% trade here. So all these, anywhere off of this yellow line, if we put an entry, we're going to get our 10% move, right? Which is where we only need half of that to get our 5 times 5%, 25%, or maybe we use 7% leverage to get our 30% at halfway up. But with all that said, if we take a look at the 45 minute, we can see that the 786 on the 45 minute is sitting at this level here, which is a good target. You can see here that, you know, getting into the possible 5382 section, the golden section here, you know, you still got to make your way up, right? So at the end of the day, you know, as this is building momentum, we have a good opportunity. Even if we wait for it to give us more support or more confirmation, which would simply be this. Confirmation would be breaking the 236, retesting that 236, and then we set our entries at that level there, and that puts us in that section there, heading up to our 786. So as you move along, there's plenty of options there. And now all we have to do is measure that out to see, okay, if we play that trade, right? Let's say we do that trade. That trade is going to give us an opportunity where we're still trading at about not 8%, so half of that is 4. If we use 5x leverage, 5 times 4 is, you know, 20%. So we're still in that 20%. Remember, we want to go 20 to 60%. The lowest is 20. So this puts us in a section where all that really makes perfect sense to where we are and what we're looking to get into. So this is a really good trade building up, and the targets are really good here. And the possibility of it breaking out even higher, going to touch up here, is even better, because if it does break out and move up to that section and retest that, that's 20%, so half of that would be 10. And if you had a 5x on that, that's an easy 50%. So 5x leverage here brings us 20 to 30%, all the way up to 50%. 7% leverage gives us 30 up to 70. So we're in a good position here to go 5x leverage or even 7. So I would probably, for me, I'd probably be moving more to the 7-8 leverage, because all this looks pretty good, and it looks like it's steadying out here and showing support in this area. So right now I'd probably be setting along at that 148, but I got to let the time frames play out. But so far we have support and resistance in all these areas. It looks pretty good. It looks, as this plays down, it's probably going to be 148.30 as an option. And now let's zoom in a little bit more on the 30 minute so that we can get a little more clearer vision of what we're looking for. And it does look like, you see right there, you have the golden pocket here, the 382, sitting at 148.17, right? You see that right there? So that's probably going to be the section that you're looking for. And this is where you would start building your system, right? So your first system would say, okay, let's say I'm going long here, right? You would set a long here, and you would put the long and say, okay, here we go. I'm going to do this long, and I'm going to put it at the 4817. So 4817. Let's say we're doing what a $6,000 trade. So here is where I would put half of my trade. I would put 3K in, and I would do, since I'm splitting it, where I'm going to put a lower level, which means I'm going to put my next 3K down here. This is where I would say, okay, I'm going to, instead of 5x leverage here, I'm going to run with my 10x leverage in case it doesn't go back down and it just keeps running. Then I have my 3,000 in. That extra, you know, instead of doing 5x by making it 10, I'm still in good shape if it never retests, okay? Now, my second thing would be there is I put 3K in at 10x. Now, the next move would be is to basically say, okay, I'm going to set my next 3K, which is my other half, and I'm going to put it here. So this is the entry at 1.47. This is going to be my 3K for a total of 6K. And then my stop loss is going to be this 14609. So a little bit below that, because you don't want to be right on that line because it will touch it. So I'll probably do 146 in that area, right? So that is how I would play this trade here. That way I can get the best of both worlds. Now, that right there is basically the strategy that we're waiting for, and then this is a system on how to get into that trade. Now, personally, what I do is I'm a little more greedy, so I would actually run this down to here, and I would look for that extra percentage down there, and then I would put my other entry at the bottom, and then that would allow me to move my stop loss to a lower section, which would be more in this scenario here, because to me that's the real place that it can go to, and this is also going to increase my percentages, right? And I'll show you what I mean. By doing this, instead of being at this upper level, by going here, my original entry is about 0.5% better, right? And it allows it to be a little more juicy. Or if you want to go in the middle of there and say, okay, I'm gonna take the middle world, which is normally a pretty good call. You'd go into the middle section there and say, okay, I'm gonna get in at 147.62, and then on your other one, you just move it to the middle of that next section there, which happens to line up with a lot of the support or resistance that it found earlier. So those are the two areas that I would put my orders in, right? So that's a way of what we call being greedy on the entries, and it allow you to pick up more percentages and also increase your gains, because when you're cheaper and you're lower, they rotate up, right? Now, how do you know when to put these trades in or set them or forget them? It's simply going to be based on, how the momentum's moving. So if you're a person who doesn't get a chance to watch this trade like every hour or something like that, then, going for the lower move, the half move instead of here, bringing it down, being greedier on the entry, is a better chance for you to get in at a better price, because you're not seeing the volume, and you need to just understand that you got to start aiming for those other targets, right? It's really that simple. So that's a no-brainer there, right? Giving yourself a better entry that you're not being able to watch, and then that's really how I would really focus on that as my first entry. And then my second entry is where I would put down where the lowest levels that were showing up earlier are the ones that kind of bounce. So that's where I would be looking at, and that allows me to put my stop loss way lower than it currently was and drop it below that. So this is the way to look at how you play this trade. But my alert system here, before I even put my limits in, would be taking a look at put the moon here, so you can see where the 30 minutes, the 30 minutes bending there. The 30 minute is already starting to bend up here, showing that there's volume growing here, but the price is still going down. So to set an alert, you just go to your 1 hour. You see how that 1 hour RSI is broken down right there? So you just click on it, go to add alert to the RSI. It's already on crossing, right? So you're set there, and then it's the 1 hour, and all you got to do is you put yourself a message, and you just put the 1 hour, so you know what time frame, RSI, XRP. And that way, when it does pop up, you get that notification. All right, see here, stochastic RSI. To give you an idea when this crosses back up and it's moving itself up there. But yeah, so that's kind of a way of understanding. Now, the way to not panic here and jump into everything is by all the research that we did earlier, which was fundamentally on the daily and the 4 hours, that we already found support zones, right? So we have this support zone. We already found areas that it should come back down and hit. And then we have these lower support areas here. So we know that there is going to be a pullback here, so we can look at this and go, well, there is a pullback here, so I'm probably going to skip on this. I'm going to start aiming for these lower levels. And then you can see here on the 1 hour, you have a block right there that's sitting right there that most people are going to aim for, or target-wise, where they're not going to get in until it actually hits this 1 hour block. And then we can see if there's anything different. Let's say on the 45 minute. 45 minute actually a little bit lower right there. And then we'll check the 15. Right, and the reason why I'm checking the 15 is just to kind of see how it's, you know, what current block it's in now. And we can see right now that we're in a block. And we haven't broke through the block. So we're in the block. We're in the block. We're in the block. And now you can see that it can go all the way down to here, which is 146, 147 area, and then bounce up, which is kind of like what we're looking at to make sense. Yeah, I mean that's pretty much the move there, right? So it's like now on the 15 we can see that we're at the top of a block. And then we can now see that the bottom of the block is sitting at this lower level here. So let me get a price on that. And that price level, and I'm going to put it on the support area, which is 143.37, which is what we kind of looked at earlier, and then a support of 146.80. So this, once again, would be the area that we'd be looking for, 147.33, as an area for us to consider a long position. So that right there would be setting us up for our long trades as we wait for our dailies and all our other trades to come through. But it's just explaining to you what's happening without, you know, having to really dig too deep in there. So that's our strategy, and then that's a system, right? 5%. You know, we're going to go with the 7 to 10% because we know that we have a greedier entry, which will give us more profits, and then we have these support areas at 147 and at 146.78 that are pretty strong. So because of that, we know that we're going to at least come back down there. So it's not like you know, you're jumping the gun here. You just know that you don't want this to have to be like this, right? Think of it this way: you don't want to be in a trade that has to break the, you know, the cluster, right? Because this what's happening right now is that you're in a cluster. So here's this parallel channel that's happening right now, right? Here's the bottom of the channel, and then you have the top of the channel, right? Which is what's happening right now. And you can see it's pretty close to the block that's there. It's just a little bit higher. So what everyone's waiting for is this, right? They're waiting for this to break out. Right here, looking for the breakout, right? To close above with a candle, have a push. Then they're waiting for it to come back and retest, which will probably be this support line here. And then once it does that retest, this is where people are going to buy in, and that's going to get that big push. So right now for us, we know that that's the targets that are happening, and that's what's looking to happen. And more than likely, it's probably going to get a push and end up hitting the bottom of this 15-minute, you know, box, or it's going to break through and reject at the top of the box. But those are giving us our targets again. So this is how we have targets where we should be aiming and what we can look for. And then on the other side, it also allows us to kind of look and go, okay, well, nothing's, you know, prices isn't that spectacular on all these moves yet. We need a price to be a little more giving, a little more greedy for us so that we make more off of it. But here's our target. So if we go over here and we measure this out, the entry off of here is only about 1.3%, right? We need something to be, if we do half of that, that's only going to be, you know, the max here is 5%. So no matter what happens, we need this to pull down, and we need it to get to where we're getting a good price here. So at the 143 or 147.33 back up to here, that's 2%. Back to where it's supposed to be, the top of that's 3%. Half of that would be, let's say, 2. So our 10x leverage is going to give us our 20%. So we always want to be making, like I said, 20 to 30%, and then on the runners, 50 to 100. So this is all, you know, still setting up in our zone, and then we just start looking for those lower entries, right, which are these lower supports. So we start pulling back, going, okay, here's a 786 on the 15-minute, and then normally that's going to pull back to these lower levels. So our entry once again is sitting around the 146.80 all the way down to the 146.12. So those are the two entries that we're looking for the breakouts. And then, yeah. So for us, it's just to be great. You see these three yellow here, how many times that we hit these areas here. So more than likely, that's the trade that we're going to be looking for. Is this lower level here, 146.7-ish? Probably the 786, which is the 146.78. Having that as a support area. That's where we would be looking for the breakout to come somewhere after it pulls back, to that section there, right? So for us, we can get a little more greedy. We want to, drop that down, probably hit this section here, 146.07 as an entry, and then half of it there, and then you can do here. If you want to not make sure you don't miss, then do half of your trade at that 786, and then do the other half, in between the two next support systems like there, and then you're in for some and less for the other, but you're both in on it, and you can both your trades are in it, so 50%, 50%, and then that gives you a nice little average move to get in there. But at the end of the day, the entire setup is waiting for it to come back down, and we're waiting for, remember, the moon reset. So after all this is said and done, we have all these levels that we can look for, but the reality is this: we are going to be sitting on this, and the trade that we're looking for is 144.48. So we're going to leave this trade here. The best entry that we're going to get here is the 133, 134 down here. So we're going to come back to this trade. This is just a way to evaluate this strategy on what you're trying to get into. And remember, what we're trying to get into is, once again, the 1 hour moon reset, right? Here's your moon reset, right? We need that to happen. Once that happens, then we're moving into what we want, which is our daily and our weekly positionings to the upside. So right now, with the daily headed down here, right here, you can see how the daily's heading down. I'm not taking any of these trades until this reverses. So all that other stuff here's our daily moon. We need green, blue, we need our daily green. So once that daily green comes in, right, then we can go back to everything that we just looked at and then put together the same philosophy, just see where the current prices is at that time. All right, so just wait on there. We need a daily moon reset, and that would be where we put our money in for the XRP long. All right, so watch this video. I'm going to go over these are strategies, and then a little bit of the system of the 5x, 10x, depending on percentages, depending on entries. The next videos that we make are going to be based on system, meaning what leverage should I use, how is my entry affected, what entry am I going for, where do I put 50% entry at, what do I decide is my 50% entry, if I'm doing a 50% entry, what does that bring me? So there's all those things that go into the system, and then based off that, that's how you build your system, which is your entry amount, how much your leverage is, and what's your target. On this, we're just trying to find a strategy for our long trade, for our $6,000, $10,000, $20,000 trades. We need the daily to go green, blue, green. All right, so this is where it is, man. Research this video, and we'll make more videos about this, centering on the daily blue, green, blue, green entry, and that's really what we're focused on. So that's what we're looking for before we get into a classic XRP long here. We need that to reset one time. Good luck. God bless, guys. Have a great night.